So what does your information security or what does your cybersecurity insurance company expect your policy to have in it? And here's just a couple of quick things. They do expect you to have a written information security policy. It has to be updated. It can't be 4 years old. It shouldn't even be 18 months old. It should be looked at annually. And if you're going through your IT control testing and pen testing, you're going to find gaps that are going to cause a change in policy. So you're going to update that, send it back through management for approval. Multi-factor authentication, you will pretty much no longer be permitted to get an cybersecurity insurance policy without MFA. I think everybody on the call that has any part of that understands that one. Security awareness training will need to be formalized, trackable, usually testable. You need to be able to show results that yes, these people have understood their roles as users and what they must do to combat phishing, those kind of things. Multiple backups in separate and independent locations. EDR, endpoint detection and response. That one's kind of a minimum for most insurance companies now. So you have to have that continuous monitoring or some type of continuous monitoring in place. We don't think EDR is enough. I think you should go all the way to XDR, but that's two totally different price tags. EDR does do some things and it will keep your, kind of insurance company happy there.
Something to add to that. We've seen the state of Florida being the most aggressive when it comes to public entities and their reporting requirements and their security requirements. The testing requirements that we've seen for the state of Florida are in line with what cyber insurance providers have. Being able to show that you have a schedule for testing and an enforcement policy based on test results and how people are performing. And I think we're going to see more and more states copying that. And I believe I'll say there are like 4 or 5 states that already have that, but Florida, I think Florida was like the first to it.
I think you're right around that number. They're all enhancing a little bit. I know Arkansas has changed theirs over the last year or so for reporting on how you report breaches. I don't know that some states have necessarily gotten into monitoring and things like that. I know the state of Texas is one of the first states that's made it a requirement for information security training for all state employees and I believe cities. And I think Florida's done the same with that recent bill as well. That's so your Florida cities that have to be NIST cybersecurity framework compliant, or at least they should align with that, requires the training piece. So a few more topics here. Methods of vulnerability management. That includes your, vulnerability scans, which most good IT departments own a Nessus scanner or something like that, and they have the capability to do their own vulnerability scans. Most of your frameworks permit that. They do not permit you to do your own pen testing. That is expected to be an independent test. Strong access controls, incident response plans, privileged access controls. That's a big one that has crept up in all the frameworks to be a little bit more serious. How are we reviewing and granting access to individuals that we're going to permit to be privileged users? That must be in there. Encryption of data during transmission and at rest, and adequate data classification. This is not an all-encompassing list by any means. It's just we see applications that are 3 or 4 pages, and we see applications that are 19 pages. So it just depends on who your provider is. But if you want to see what you care about, open that thing up. I mean, open up an insurance application. We're not going to go through all of these in the interest of time, I don't think, but if you take a look here, here's just some basic topics that your policy should have in them. And again, your risk assessment is going to drive some of this. Maybe you don't need much of a disaster recovery policy if everything you do is cloud-based and all of your work environment is remote. I can work from anywhere in the world. My DR plan may look different than yours if all of your people are on site. So access controls, again, encryption, logical security, nothing really earth-shattering here, but if you are trying to construct a policy for the first time, this is some good information here, and I think we'll be able to share slides, but there's a lot of great information out on the web as well. And of course, anytime, email me or Saeed, and we will help where we can on that stuff.
Two things to highlight from there, though, that I do
Sure.
want to point out, or a few things: the access control, the end user training, the vendor management, as well as patch management. Those things aren't necessarily sexy. They don't get a lot of the attention. And a lot of those things are things that can either be done with a low cost solution or done in-house. But patch management, I mean, that is outside of ransomware. I mean, even with ransomware, patch management a lot of times is something that, if that's done on a regular basis, can help you to close a gap, can make that process of committing a successful attack a little bit more challenging. You know, we, especially when we look at smaller private sector companies. Well, I can't say small public sector entities, because it's really public sector entities of any size. That patch management issue is so frequently one of the um, big concerns. We had a hospital that had an issue with, I think it was VMware, where they had some out of date software from VM. VM had said, "Hey, you need to go out there and make sure you update this." There was a bit of an issue because VM didn't necessarily publicize it as well as they should, but they did get the information out there, and the entity did not. They didn't update their resources as fast as they should, and that left them vulnerable. You know, so those are things that we have to make sure of, like access control. You need to know who has access to your data. You talked about knowing what data and devices you have, who has access to that data and devices, because that's also another exposure. You know, if you keep your company laptop sitting in the parking lot, it's almost impossible to keep it secure, right?
Exactly. Well, and I think the vendor management thing is very important because most of us now, we during COVID, we had a kind of a rush to cloud technology. We're relying on vendors. Well, how much of us have done our due diligence on that vendor? Has that vendor gone through their IT audits? Do they have a SOC 2 report for you? Can they validate that their controls are in place? Those are questions we have to ask them before we trust them with our data. And that's where the vendor management piece comes in. So, and if you're a higher education institution on the phone, or any other type of financial institution, you're required to have that in place by law. These are some things that you're expected to have in place. But
Mhm.
again, if you stop and think about it, it's a little bit of common sense. Are you going to give your critical data to someone, whether before you find out if they're reputable? Your personal data, work data, whatever. So it's not very difficult. And like Saeed said, that can be ran in house. Vendor management does not have to be an expensive project.